Here you are closed $4 million in funding. Not an easy job here. We're sitting in Palo Alto, the hottest AI hub in Silicon Valley. Tell us, how did you get this?
It really started with exploring problem spaces, right? Like I've always wanted to build a startup right from my very young age to everything that I've been trying. So I started my career out as an engineer, understood problems.
How is an AI startup different from a non-AI startup?
So today, I almost think every successful startup has become an AI startup.
Okay.
They probably did not start out this way, and this is where they are right now.
So if you were to quantify the impact in dollars for a Fortune 500 company which you rescued, what is the kind of savings you did with your tool?
In terms of just cost savings, right? Like they moved a lot of these tools from a per seat model to just saying I would rather pay for the LLM usage, and moved on to like open source tools versions of those. So there it was nearly an 80% cost savings of like hundreds of thousands of dollars that we are talking about, right? Like so if they were paying for the per seat basis with very little visibility.
So what is your strategy looking like, your startup strategy? Are you building for an acquisition or are you planning to be a long-lasting company? What is your vision like at this point? Hello and welcome to another fantastic episode of Pitch Cafe podcast. We are in the age of AI and data is the core and crux of every AI startup. Every large company is going through an AI transformation, and if we don't get our data right, if we don't get the security of the data right, we are in big trouble. As and how AI is getting powerful, the bad actors who attack these systems are also getting powerful. So here we have a startup which is incubated in Y Combinator, just closed $4 million in seed funding, and their mission is to secure GenAI applications in the enterprise. Let's find out who this man of the moment here is, who's just gotten off interview here today with the co-founder and CEO of Unbound, Rajaram Srivastava. Rajaram, welcome to Pitch Cafe podcast.
Thanks a lot, Vidya, for having me, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Wonderful. So Rajaram, I'm in of your work. Here you are, a Y Combinator incubee from MIT, Boston, and you've had a great stint at companies like Palo Alto Networks, Adobe, and Imperva, and your entire expertise is headed in securing data, not any kind of data, but data used by generative AI and AI applications. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Here you are closed $4 million in funding. Not an easy job here. We're sitting in Palo Alto, the hottest AI hub in Silicon Valley. Tell us, how did you get this the startup bug? You're doing so well in these amazing companies. How did your startup come to be?
It really started with exploring problem spaces, right? Like I've always wanted to build a startup right from my very young age to everything that I've been trying. So I started my career out as an engineer, understood problems, and then landed in cybersecurity by chance roughly about 8 years ago at this point. And so I've seen firsthand a lot of problems with respect to data. So it was just the intersection of having that capability to build something and look at the problem as a product manager, which I've seen several hundred implementations of data loss prevention programs and so on. So all of that really led me to having a first-hand information of what is a relevant problem to solve. And I've been wanting to start a company, and it just made the perfect sense to bring the skill sets together.
Yeah, you've tried a startup before, and how did that work out?
Okay, great. So I mean, right from when I was in school, I tried to sell, right? Like, so I used to make PowerPoint presentations of textbook chapters and sell to my students, like, the same class and so on. So from there, I mean, that was really very, very early on. But really, as a serious startup, we did one when I was relatively early in career. I was an engineer. I thought I knew everything, and what we were building on was around the point of sale kind of space.
Yeah.
So this was before Clover and Squire and Toast was in market. So we just found ways to plug into existing legacy point of sale machines to give advanced analytics on top of it. Great idea, okay execution. I just wished we had scaled fast enough. So I solved the engineering problem right. I couldn't get the distribution problem right at the first time. And that's one of the things I wanted to get a better handle of. So I went on to do my management program at MIT and took on product manager roles where I could have a first-hand view of how companies are solving for distribution. And the idea is that this time we'll be a lot better, and we're already seeing signs of traction with Unbound.
So, there was this hot OpenAI debate, who owns the data? And OpenAI came clear saying the AI company owns the data. A lot of customer interactions data, which they trusted OpenAI with, was shared in the trial. Tell us what your take on this is and how you're trying to look at this problem with your startup.
I'll take a little bit of a contrarian approach here, right? Like, I love and trust OpenAI, and I think they would do the right thing. So as a part of the YC badge, I have a chance to interact with Sam Altman and so on. So I believe the companies have the right intention. Don't get me wrong here. I'm not going to be that any other security vendor that is crying howl over OpenAI and Anthropic. I think they're doing a phenomenal job of what they're up to. And they do have the responsibility to be trusted guardians of data, which is why OpenAI is fighting back the lawsuit with full vigor. It's the lawsuit between New York Times and OpenAI, where New York Times is asking for, hey, you have to retain every single conversation and use it for submit it to the courts when it comes to the right case. So the problem here is not so much about who owns the data, but it really comes down to retention. The simplest way to do data security, and it might sound like a joke answer, is to not store data. Okay. So you are signing up for unknown troubles when you're choosing to retain customer data when you don't need to. A classic parallel I can draw is passwords, right? Like, this is from about a decade old, where we decided as an industry that, hey, I won't be storing plain text passwords anymore. I will only be storing hashed passwords. So two things. One, obviously, if now a hacker gets access to the data, they only have access to the hash text. And that is good enough to do authentication, validation, comparison, but you don't have any business to store people's passwords. It's the same parallel I draw to OpenAI's prompt policy today, right? Like, once you store prompts, once you store the input and output, you are attracting all sort of evil eyes, so to speak. Like, you are gonna have hackers coming and accessing your system. You do have that data that is sitting there that could potentially be up for leaks and perhaps
like a time bomb.
Exactly. It's a ticking time bomb. So if you don't have a business to store the data, don't store it to begin with. Right? That's what OpenAI is arguing for. And the second, obviously, is when you're storing data, then you are also subject to legal norms. If a court subpoenas for the data, you have to give it as long as you're storing the data. And you don't have to do any of that if you don't store the data. And that's the proposition that we stand for. Like, enterprise data belongs at the enterprise, not at some third party.
So, I was looking at your company's use case, and I saw this word AI sprawling. What is AI sprawling, and why is it a rampant problem, and what are you doing to tackle AI sprawling?
AI sprawl really refers to people using a bunch of different AI applications all over the place. If you are a 1,000-employee company, you are probably having 1,000 different AI applications because different people just sign up for free trial. We saw this in SaaS with SaaS sprawl, right? Like, everybody just signing up for some SaaS application that made their life better. With AI, it just became even more so, right? Like, if somebody comes and tells you, like, hey, your ops job is taken care of, you don't have to, or you don't have to write code, I can write these prototype apps for you. Obviously, employees going to sign up for it, whether or not IT or security approves it. So that's really what is meant by sprawl. And we've been fortunate enough to live through a little bit of the cycle when it came to AI adoption too. Early on, people were in denial, right? Like, they almost thought of this to be like a problem to go and solve. So if you're in school, your approach is to say that, oh, don't bring calculators to tests, because the outcome that they're trying to get out of these tests is to see whether you can solve those problems independently or not.
Correct.
In an organization where you're getting paid by the hour to do your job, you have to bring in any tool that will make your life easier. Thereby, they get to do it in lesser number of hours.
So let's say the organization allows tools like ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude. How does your company manage those interactions where I'm asking the ChatGPT query, and then it could be personal, it could be work related. Let's say I have a question about a code, and then I'm asking them. The code could be confidential, and it could be your competitive edge in the market. What kind of intervention or integration does your tool do in this case?
I'll start with the integration part. We integrate into top AI tools so we help organizations make these unsanctioned wild west of AI applications into sanctioned tools that you can use to make your job better. And we're already seeing a lot of organizations move in that direction. So once you decide that these are my sanctioned tools, like, I'm going to be using Cursor or Windsurf or or codecs or anything else, and then pick up any specific model that you want to be with, like, I'm going to be using Glean for document processing and so on. So once that catalog is done, and we help them bring up the catalog based on usage data and everything, we integrate deeply into many of these solutions to give organizations the edge when it comes to handling data going into GenAI. We believe in integrations over interventions because the classic data loss prevention market, and I'll give a little bit of background on DLP itself, right? Like, because the way that works is you try to send an email to a third party that contained confidential information, so I block you from doing it. Is how a lot of the traditional data loss prevention products came out to be. And what started with email was pretty much everything on the firewall. I'm like, oh, you're putting something on Reddit, you're putting something on Stack Overflow, and so on. The way incumbents are approaching the problem is exactly the way they approach Reddit and Stack Overflow. Like, it's an optionality. I can choose to put data on Stack Overflow and get answer or not. But with AI, that's not the case. Like, people are putting confidential information with AI day in and day out. Like, we catch thousands pretty much every day. And there's a research that says, 55% of all data that's shared with AI is sensitive in nature, has PII in it, and so on. So if every other prompt is going to have sensitive information, like any kind of intervention that you put on it is going to be not getting the intended consequences. Like, people are going to get annoyed and go use that on their phone or from a personal device and then just get their job done, which is even worse than what you wanted. At least in a corporate device, you have some kind of guardrails and sanctions and controls. So what we have is more of an integration kind of an approach, wherein we say, okay, sure, you want to work with confidential information, you want to ask coding related questions on proprietary code, then what is the best thing that we can do? So we start with doing things like redaction, right? Like, redaction works pretty well for things like passwords, secrets.
Explain redaction for the audience.
Exactly. Redaction really just means, you would have seen it in movies where you see CIA confidential reports and then the page has like highlights everywhere and half the page is not seen. That is kind of the example of redaction. Whatever you deem as sensitive, you just strike it out and replace it with something else. So that's what you do with redaction.
You're obfuscating the data.
You're just substituting with anything. Like, take a password, replace it with star. That is redaction also.
Got it.
So it works beautifully well for code with secrets. Like, you have static passwords that is lugging around in the code, like, and connection strings to databases, private API keys and all that. Like, LLM doesn't need to know what your private API key is to be able to troubleshoot that code better or to help you write better code. Like, all of that is not required at all, right? Like, so you do that redaction, you still get 100% good quality output for the task that you're trying to do. Second is, let's say I'm working with board meeting documents or competitor analysis presentation. I'm a consultant, I'm doing this. So then you upload whatever is your unreleased financial statements to a place like ChatGPT and then you ask for summarizing.
People do that?
People do that all the time.
God.
We catch it. Like, it's like we see hundreds of instances of these things happening. Documents that are pre-classified as confidential, documents that are pre-classified as top secret within their information protection programs.
So they don't have an incognito mode.
Yeah, incognito doesn't mean that LLM doesn't get that data. The same thing, if you're on enterprise plan, they may not use the data for training, but the retention is very, very questionable. Like, they are still retaining data in majority of cases. And what they do with it is still very questionable.
Let's go back to what you were explaining. You were talking about how you obfuscate or mask the data. And then what else do you do?
So, that's the second example. Let's say you are uploading board meeting notes, right? Like, and then sometimes the traditional DLP controls can be a little bit more effective because they don't necessarily have to do that job there. They can do it manually. But again, people are, once they're used to AI tools, it's like having a drug, right? Like, you want to keep using it and not go back to doing it the way you were doing it before. The way we approach the problem is, sure, you upload the board meeting notes. We determine that this is confidential in nature through our own proprietary LLM models. Like, these are very, very small language models that are hosted internally. So we don't call OpenAI APIs on your behalf asking if this is confidential or not. That would take the point away, right? So we do our own classification based on that, and we selectively route it to models that they could configure it to. So, for example, you could integrate your Vertex AI or Amazon Bedrock models to Unbound. And once we determine that this is confidential, you can have policies at a security level that says, okay, if this is this level of confidentiality, then process that request through this LLM that is closed and private, often hosted by themselves, or hosted through like their cloud service provider on an open make model. All of these enable enable use cases without really stopping them and saying that, oh, you can't use this, go do it on your phone if you wanted to. Like, that's not the way to go.
When you were explaining all these use case scenarios, the word AI governance was becoming very visible to me. Can I say that you were explaining the pillars of how you go about AI governance?
Exactly.
Okay.
So some of the earliest customers of ours, when we worked with them, we actually helped them put together their AI governance strategy. So
this is the Fortune 500 company you're talking about?
These are large enterprises, not exactly Fortune 500. The Fortune 500 came with a good amount of understanding of what they wanted to do.
And how did you help them? I remember you talk about this in your interview. So how did you rescue the Fortune 500 company?
They came from a state where they had a governance policy, and they have several thousand employees. They're Fortune 500, and they had scenarios where, well, we have this as our AI usage policy, but I have no visibility into how and what people are doing to it. So that's where they came from. Interestingly, they had blocked a lot of the AI tools, and they were getting a lot of pressure from developers, every knowledge worker at that point, to be able to open up these tools, like open up this tool and so on. And the security team was getting inundated with, okay, I need to go through their SOC 2 reports. I need to go through their, I'm trusting them with data, and how do I go about some of these, right? Like, so they started from that level of maturity in the program. So they were not super early on, but they were still relatively progressive in terms of how they wanted to enable AI within their organization.
Yeah.
So, and then they got deeper into it, saying like, hey, I just want to start from use case visibility. I just want to know how are people using these tools, because they are paying often by the seat license for some of these tools.
Yeah.
So if you buy for 1,000 licenses, you probably have 100 power users, and the other 700, 800 are like maybe average users, not justifying the $40, $60 per seat cost. And there are other another 30% that are not even using the tool. These are just managers that are sitting on it with no much usage. They're just supervising their teams and so on. So that was something that we learned. And then it's really started with visibility, and we are still into control, like how do I do those guardrails kind of scenarios.
So if you were to quantify the impact in dollars for a Fortune 500 company which you rescued, what is the kind of savings you did with your tools?
So in terms of just cost savings, right? Like they moved a lot of these tools from a per seat model to just saying I would rather pay for the LLM usage, and moved on to like open source tools versions of those. So there it was nearly an 80% cost savings of like hundreds of thousands of dollars that we're talking about, right? Like, so if they were paying for the per seat basis with very little visibility versus just paying for the LLMs, that's the number that they were able to save. Pretty high magnitude, very high percentages, and that was one of the biggest things that got us in.
And one last question about the technical aspect of your startup before we move on to other things. You talk about saving cost on coding tools, and you also deal with error handling with your solutions. Can you explain a little bit how you go about this?
Let's talk about market landscape on coding tools, right? Like, so on one side, there are proprietary coding tools. Like I would say Cursor, Windsurf would really come from those angles. So wherein it's a black box, you pay a per seat license, and then they do their magic. They sometimes expose which models they're using and so on. But in a lot of cases, they absorb the cost. Like if you're a power user and you're paying $40 per month for Cursor, you're probably getting a lot more out of it than the $40. If they really did routing of the models the way they did.
Yeah.
What really happens is developers get tiered out. Like after about 3 hours of good usage, they start shutting you back saying, oh, for the next 3 hours, you cannot use premium models. You have to use cheaper models and so on. So a lot of the forward-thinking companies, like engineering forward companies, that what they chose to do was separate the two pieces out. I'm like, my developers are very expensive per our employees, so I want to make sure they have the best tools at their disposal. They expose tools like Klein and RuCode particularly more popular these days, to just say, oh, connect any LLM that you want and use the most premium models as much as possible in scenarios that they want to use it on. And this has been very popular. They spend several times what they would spend with the base $40 kind of model, but they see a lot more productivity and output out of it, so they're like, you know what, I'll just pay for it. Like oftentimes even $1,000 per user level of costing. That's where we come in with the open source tools. We come in with the idea of, hey, I can help you do the models routing effectively, and developers are very picky about models that they want to use, like particularly for coding use cases. So it's not a very popular topic. The way we try to optimize is not like trying to pinch the last dollar out of it, but really just saying, hey, for this use case, we believe this model works well, and then you do it. And on the closed source tools like Cursor or Windsurf and so on, we just give them visibility of who are power users. What are they using it for? Are they using it for troubleshooting purposes? Are they using it for just writing code? And it's interesting because just understanding those use cases and knowing what are people using AI for with respect to developer scenarios, people learn things like, oh, this particular file, which is like 2,000 lines, about 1,800 of it is written by AI, and it becomes absolutely unmaintainable at this point. So then people wanted to have policies around it to say that, hey, these areas are prohibited for write file operations, and some things they can do apply to fun, and then that needs to go through an additional level of scrutiny when it comes to review and so on. The way we solve for this on proprietary coding models has been particularly very interesting, more than even the cost savings aspect.
Yeah, I think that problem is going to grow. People are going to explore a lot more LLMs, and this is raced down to the bottom. The cost is just dropping. They won't shy from using new tools all the time, and your solution is going to be more valuable because there's always this insecurity. I'm using a new AI tool. Is this going to be secure or not?
As early as last week, OpenAI had a downtime, so their APIs were down for a significant amount of time, right? Like, so the uptime of a lot of these APIs vary somewhere between 75 to 90%, right?
Yeah.
To give you a frame of context on network security side, like Palo Alto Networks firewalls and so on, or like, the remote cloud firewalls, or anything on the infra side, the uptime that is guaranteed with large enterprises is like 99.59s and 69s and so on. That's the level of reliability that enterprises expect. Like, so LLMs are not there today. So it requires a lot of tooling and infra to make this to a higher level of reliability than 0.59s, right? Like, so what we do is we have mapping, and we have data of several billion tokens at this point to be able to say that, hey, this is working, this is not working. So we have auto routing policies that says like, hey, if this particular service is down, you go retry on this one. And even within the same service, like, you get rate limited out a lot often. Like, Anthropic particularly is known for this because they have so much demand and relatively lower capacity in comparison. So you hit the API too often, you get a rate limit. You get like, oh, okay, you know what, push out for some time and then come back to me is what a rate limit is all about.
Yeah.
So when you get rate limited, I can't have my developers sitting idle for several hours in a row.
Correct.
Then we have our own ways of retrying this through a variation of, like, using it from Bedrock, using it from Vertex, and so on.
So you're getting into more than security here.
Yeah, it's core infra that we are dealing with.
So you're what do you call this? You're a productivity tool.
That's one way to put it. It's primarily infra. Security's role has always been about infra. Like, infra uptime was security's primary problem.
Correct.
Right? Like, making sure your resources are available to the legitimate users at the right time with the right level of latency and performance requirements. Yeah. That is the first role of security. So if somebody brings an application down, it's an infra problem and a security problem, but security costs it.
So much to digest here, and I'm sure you're not going to stop at just, when you were describing all this, I just thought about this point solution kind of approach you're taking. I know you said you will be building a platform at some point, or you will not mind integrating into a platform. So what is your strategy looking like, your startup strategy?
Okay, I'll take the point solution question to begin with, right? Like, so we are a point solution today, and the earlier a startup realizes that, the better it is for the startup. That's just honest advice, because you are an early stage startup that is competing for resources and time and money and everything. So your incumbents that you're trying to replace have several $1 billion to work with. And so if you're going to say, oh, I'm going to build a company as huge as Microsoft, like, people are going to laugh at you, right? Like, so obviously that's not the way that works. Point solutions are great for startups. Any startup that claims to be a platform when they are early stage, like, I try to look at them with a lot of skepticism, right? Like, so you have to solve a tiny, boring but important problem in a way that is 10 to 100x better than incumbent. Only then people are going to come to you. Otherwise, they are okay with status quo. Right? So you use that as a wedge, and then you drive into the market. And then once you are in the customer's environment, you don't go and do an upsell. That's just the startup formula that has been, right? Like, so platform is great for large companies that want to eventually go there and build into it. So you always start as a point problem and then eventually build a platform based on your ability to solve that particular point solution problem really well. And that's how, like, the largest companies that we know know today started with very, very small problems that they were looking at. Like some of the biggest routing firewall companies were like, oh, I will solve just for intrusion detection. I will solve just for threat protection. And that's how they expanded their catalog into even in security. So moving from there to the acquisition versus building a large company solution, right? And an acquisition is like getting a consolation prize at the end of it, saying A plus for effort, but hey, you got certain things wrong and you ended up getting a consolation prize in the process. You should go chase the first prize, and then it's okay if you got 95% of things right and certain things did not work out. You end up with a consolation prize, and that may be okay. And there are exceptions, obviously, to this, right? Like, so obviously, Windsurf getting a $3 billion consolation prize, like, I would love to be in that place.
Yeah.
But that really comes from a scenario where the founders did not want to sell. They knew that they were hitting for the first prize.
Yeah.
And then they had to be convinced to go take a very, very high number on consolation prize.
Yeah.
So all the public acquisitions that we see of like several $1 billion are all these kind of scenarios.
Talking of that Scale AI at 19 billion.
Oh,
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. Scale AI also YC company, right? Like,
Correct,
so
correct.
They would have very well become a public company on their own accord, and they were minting money. They were like, so they had to be coerced into selling to be able to, for Meta to get what they wanted, and that's why the high number comes.
Tell us what your experience being at Y Combinator was, and how did you get into Y Combinator?
YC has been great for us, and you speak to any founder that have gone to Y Combinator, they say that. You would know why. A few things, right? Like one, it truly exposed us to what building with the very, very best meant. And
when you say very best, tell us who they are. Are they just VCs, or they are former founders, or they are developers?
No, mostly founders. Like, I'm really just talking, take the general partners aside. Like, Dalton was my general partner at YC. Even if, like, they're great on their own account, like people that have built several $1 million companies and then like had an exit and so on. But just being with a cohort of about 100 plus different companies, everyone like just being the best at solving that particular problem, it was really like, I don't know, mind-boggling to say this at least. Like, so one person in my batch was building data center for space. The other person in the batch was building submarine data centers. There's just the scale of dedicated founders that they bring in, right? Like, and when you see people like that, you also get exposed to, that's the scale of company that you want to build. It expands horizons and whatnot. Like, unfortunately, a lot of founders don't have access to something like that, so they tend to think smaller, like taking the consolation prize, for example. Right? Okay, I just want to build something for 3 years, get a quick scheme, and then like exit in 3 years, but never happens. Like, if you think of it in that way, it doesn't happen. If you think of a 10-year IPO, then it may happen that, okay, 5 years down the line, you settle for an acquisition because you're seeing certain things, or you were coerced into getting acquired. That is the kind of expansion of horizon that YC gave us.
Yeah, and they backed you. They did not let you go. Even though you're out of YC, they did back you in your first round of C capital, right? Along with raised capital. Mm-hmm. So tell us what your investor pitch, what can first-time founders learn on how to pitch?
I'll talk about it in the right spirit, right? Like, so fortunately I had decent credentials, so I didn't have to have a very, very hard time early on pitches. Like, pre-seed today has become extremely competitive. Like, there are several people building in the space.
How much did you raise for pre-seed again?
Pre-seed was pretty much only Y Combinator.
Y Combinator.
Yeah, so
okay.
Today, if I go out in the market and I'm trying to raise a small pre-seed check from an investor, it's just in that context that I meant that it has become very competitive. Raising VC funds does teach you is to take rejections well. If you're a high caliber founder, like, and I see this all the time, like, especially in OIC too, right? Like, I was top of the batch, I got AP in my high school, and then went to do undergrad and like an Ivy League, like Stanford, MIT, Columbia. You've not seen rejections all that much in your life. And then with VC, it doesn't matter what your pedigree is, you are going to get rejected a lot actually.
Yeah.
Right?
So tell me one thing, you evaluate YC applications. What are the winning applications doing differently than the losing applications?
So I help founders with their interview process and like, when they're applying to YC and so on. Like, a single biggest thing that YC looks for is founder market fit. Like, and that pre-seed stage, that's the one thing that you keep looking for, right? Like, is this the right person that is positioned to solve this problem? That's what founder market fit is all about. Cool. So all the time we see people like, I want to build a diet planner because I'm going through a fitness regime now, but I'm a smart computer science kid from Stanford. Like, those are typical things that may not work out. Whereas if you had like deep work experience in space, building spacecraft, I was with Airbus before, I was with the satellite program before.
So what happens to college dropouts? How does YC treat them? Because a lot of college dropouts are coming up with phenomenal startups. So what are they doing differently?
It's interesting because YC does not typically encourage college dropout, and this is just my opinion, right? I'm not speaking for YC when I say something like this. But we did see a couple of college dropouts in our batch, more like they are they just take a hold from their existing program and then they take it up later. The thing that plays in your favor when you're young and hungry is you have very little dead weight or like anything else that is holding on to you. You can go to a 5-people hacker house, keep building all day long, and then like eventually build something very successful. Like that's what a lot of the early stage consumer AI startups. So the thing that I talk about founder market fit, everything, it doesn't apply to any of them. Like they just go win, and 3-people team making 10 million in ARR has become like relatively not uncommon.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing. Like when you're young, you have so much grit and so much nothing else to work with.
Distractions.
Exactly.
Yeah. On that note, I want to ask, how is a AI startup different from a non-AI startup?
So today, I almost think every successful startup has become an AI startup.
Okay.
They probably did not start out this way, and this is where they are right now.
So small business and B2C are getting disrupted with AI. They have to really think hard how to work with agents or the non-Google search route.
Yeah, there are a lot of those cascading implications, right? And that's why I say if somebody is building a company today, they should just be thinking about AI because the approach is how can I involve AI in a supply chain planning process, right? Like agents are going to become mainstream, and that just means huge cascading effects. Like what you rightly brought up, like okay, now SMBs are going to be not optimizing for Google Maps and local list search results and Yelp results, but how do I get more into showing up in the AI mode? And
queries. Yeah.
So all of these lead into cascading, transcending problems that will all be umpteen opportunities for startups to come and solve for.
So Rajaram, there's always this debate I see with the CIOs and CISOs, which tool to pick. So tell us, what is your advice using your product and what kind of value they will get by adopting your product?
I'll talk more from what we observe in the market than prescriptionary advice, right? Like the CISOs have their own security challenges within the organization that they're trying to solve for.
So CISO is a subset of CIO, or do they do something different?
It's a controversial question, Vidya, because the way it is working is we're seeing by and large CISOs reporting to CIOs now, but CISOs hate to admit it. We are on.
But it's very stressful. If something goes wrong, the CISO is under the gun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then all these politics suddenly go out of the business and CISO is back in focus and they're like, okay, now what, right? But I don't have the level of autonomy that I used to have, but it's becoming more like, I'm still responsible for the security program. What you're seeing with security programs in general, and the best CISOs don't look at security program as a tool and like single pane of glass and everything. It's all language that we vendors love to push in the security narrative. The best CISOs are running a security program that solves and it is more often than not, tool is a very small, meaningful pillar of that security program. It really comes down to, how do I quantify threats? How do I triage the right level of responses that I'm getting? How am I making sure that I'm the team and everyone is not crying wolf at everything? So it's more of a prioritization problem than this next fancy tool will come and solve that. And as a vendor, we have gone through a maturity curve with that messaging as well. So understanding where they come from and what is their problem day in and day out that they are trying to solve in terms of security has been very meaningful in getting through that discussion. Tools, people, and processes, each of this is important. If your tool helps with the process, with workflows, and with automations, or to help surface the right level of alerts, that is helpful. We had a generation of security products where, they had to show like a gazillion number of alerts day in and day out to prove that that tool is useful. But now we are at a problem where, your SIM tools are just eating up so much data. Similar security incident event management tools. Think of it like NVR video recorder in your backyard, right? So if several hours of content is getting in every day and it's asking you to review that every day, that's not going to be a very useful recorder. It has to flag precisely when somebody's stealing the Amazon package versus trying to just say, there's a kitten that just ran by, right? So I think that's the problem. Imagine a world where the NVR recorder has to prove that it's working by showing that kitten that's running. That's that's kind of where a lot of security tools started out to be. So it's important to understand where they come from, the triaging and the processes that they need to run to be able to put security into practice. Data is ephemeral. It's everywhere. It's so pervasive today. It lives in somebody's laptops all the way up to data centers and mainframe. Like, so what is the chain that you're tracking and protecting to, right? And that's why we have proliferation of so many of these security tools today.
On that note, I want to ask you, you built your startup in 16 months. What are some of the unexpected things that were thrown at you? What are the curveballs you had to face before getting here? I'm literally shocked every day. They're talking about giga agents now. Every day there's a new term. There was MCP one day, there's agent to agent another day. What is something you were not prepared for that hit you and then you came out of it?
So things that I was not prepared for that hit me was not about technology. As an AI founder, the ground keeps shifting under you and you keep adapting. So rapid pivots to where the most prolific problem has been. That is a thing that we did very well with. So I have to give that. The kind of curveballs that I got thrown out was everything outside of technology. So just how hard sales is, for example, right?
Yeah.
I come from a background. Yes, I did a previous company before. I was a product manager before.
Datamatic.
But right? But I've never done direct sales. The amount of work that it takes to go to lead prospecting and then reach out, keep warm relationships, and the amount of rejections that you get from a lot of that. I think those were all huge curveballs. You would think that, hey, I'm hard. I'm building a very meaningful problem. This product is cool and everything. But you still need to go through that cycle, just the way I spoke about VC, right? So you will still get a lot of rejections. You still need to go through how things are looking at. Especially when you're building something that's brand new and they're used to a different chain of thought when it comes to it. I think that's clearly number one. And alongside, of course, I've made a lot of mistakes. Agencies is a big one. Now that we raised our seed funding, I have several hundred emails coming in box oh, I could help you with this, and this services and so on. And I've learned my lessons with agencies, right? So that's one. Hiring.
What is the lessons you've learned?
Typically, the agency model doesn't work for startups. You want somebody that is waking up, thinking about that problem.
I agree with you. I agree. It saves a lot of money.
It's money also. But usually, the problem with agencies is you have one superstar person that is literally loud in media, and they probably did a good amount of individual contributor work back then. Now they're starting an agency, right? It comes to, I have maybe 5% of their attention, and then they have somebody junior that's handling the account from there and so on. So this model doesn't scale for a startup. You want somebody waking up every day thinking about that problem that they need to solve and wake up with that same thing every day. If it's 5% of my time.
100% agree with you, because I'm a media startup and I've had my rough time with agencies. You need somebody thinking about your brand value and give you quality attention.
Exactly.
They can't do a cookie cutter approach to your startup.
Yeah.
On that note, I could go on and on. I want to respect your time. I have one question. If you look back after 20 years and look at your startup, what is that one contribution you want people to look at Unbound and this is what Unbound did. Yeah. This is what Rajaram did. I want to remember him for that.
Yeah, we want to make AI mainstream in enterprises, right? Today, either there is a lot of skepticism or it is a wild, wild west and they have no control over it. So we are that middle ground. So if in any way got enterprises to adopt AI and be more productive and focus on what they really do well, that is the problem that we want to be known for.
Yeah, amazing. On that grand vision of making AI adoption accelerate in enterprises, targeting a very large market, I wish you all the best, Rajaram, with your next stint. And I hope to see you again when you raise your next round of funding.
Absolutely. Current stint. Okay. Yeah.